So, if I look a little red or something, I got sunburned, so that's fun. Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about what I read in June. So, it is now July. It is like July 5th. So this is like the second time I filmed this. I did try to do a version on my laptop because I was having some camera trouble. So I tried to do it on my laptop and then realized I forgot to mention a couple of books, and thankfully my camera is working again, so we're just gonna redo this. I wrote some notes for myself, so if you see me looking away a lot, I'm just looking at my notes. So in June I ended up reading 11 books. Of course, most of them are not really what was on my TBR, but you know what? At this point, my TBR is more just like a guideline and not like, you know, actual books that I need to stick to. So, yeah. So the first thing I read were 5 ebooks, all by the same author, all kind of similar in a sense, though there are some differences. And they were as follows. Turned gay by the existential dread that I may actually be a character in a Chuck Tingle book. My handsome, sentient face mask protects me despite the ridiculous conspiracy theories that he won't. Also, he pounds my butt. Bisexual vampire unicorns teach me the importance of the vampire cough. Not pounded by anything while I practice responsible social distancing. And the physical manifestation of washing my hands gets me off. And those are all, of course, by Chuck Tingle. So, each of these books were a journey. Not really that long to begin with. They're fairly short overall. Very interesting. All of them are quite formulaic. They follow a certain pattern. The narrator in the story is introduced. There's some commentary on a couple of issues, social distancing or masking being a couple of issues that were in like 3 or 4 of these. Then the butt-pounding love interest is introduced, and then the butt-pounding commences with very porn-like quickness. Sexual acts themselves were also rather formulaic. They follow a similar pattern throughout. The only one that kind of differed slightly was the last book I mentioned, and that is because it's between 2 women, in a sense. It's the physical manifestation of washing your hands, so it's kind of it's complicated. Yeah, so that's the only one that like changed slightly. It wasn't really butt pounding, it was other stuff. Yeah, I don't want to get like in trouble for talking about things too closely. Also, I turn into a giggling junior high kid, so okay, we're gonna move on. So was this terribly written? Were all of these books terribly written? Yeah. Is that most definitely done on purpose because the man publicly known as Chuck Tingle is a giant troll? Hell yeah. Did I still enjoy myself immensely while I was reading all of them? You bet your ass I did. I laughed until I cried. I thought this was absolutely hilarious and very entertaining. Reading them all within a couple of days, though, I do have to say I noticed the formulaic pattern a lot more, but it wasn't really that bad. It was just funny. And honestly, I got almost as much enjoyment from reading the list of his other like titles at the back of the ebooks. Like, I almost got as much enjoyment reading those as I did from reading the actual stories. honestly, if you want a good laugh sometime, you should look up at everything he's written, because some of them are just really fucking funny. How did I rate these? I didn't. All of these books I left unrated, because how in the hell do I actually rate these? They're erotica, but there was nothing really erotic about them, personally, because the ridiculousness of it was just hyped up so much that it wasn't really, so it's not really something you read for that particular purpose. Like, I suppose you might read erotica for that particular purpose to get like interested or something, but it's not, but it feels like you could eat, but it's not really. But it was also really funny, but it's also like, well, how is it meant to be read? Is it meant to just be pure entertainment? Or is it meant, like, I have no real idea how in the hell I'm supposed to rate these. Some of the way things are worded don't sound so good. There are spelling mistakes, but even then, I don't know if the spelling mistakes are meant or not. They might be meant, because this is, so I didn't know how I was supposed to take these books exactly, so I didn't really know on what scale to rate them. So I just, yeah, I left them unrated, because really, how do I rate these? Like, what do I even classify these as? I don't know. I had to make like a whole new classification section on my chart that I use to keep track of what genres I read. So I don't know. If you really want a really good laugh, though, I would highly recommend. Yeah. Another book that I read in June was A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is by William Shakespeare. This is a play that focuses on a few different characters. There's a lot going on in this. So in this play there are basically four, I hate the word lovers. Lovers skeeves me out, but that's essentially what they are. Lovers. There is Hermia and Lysander, who are in love. Then there is Hermia's best friend, Helena, who, and then there is Demetrius. Helena is in love with Demetrius. Demetrius originally liked Helena, but then decided that he was in love with Hermia. Hermia's father wants her to marry Demetrius. He does not want her to have anything to do with Lysander, and he says, basically, his daughter's his property. She needs to do what he tells her to do, or he wants her to be put to death. Meanwhile, they bring this before, what's it, Theseus? And, like, Athens, essentially, and tell him, you know, her father says, hey, I want her to marry this guy, or you need to use Athenian law to put her to death. And Theseus is getting ready for his own wedding, and is like, hey, you need to do what your father says, or seriously think about what's going to happen to you. Her and Lysander decide they're going to run off together, and they enter the woods. So they're going to run away. They tell Helena. Helena decides to get herself into good graces with Demetrius. She's going to reveal to him that this is happening, and then they both end up in the woods. Meanwhile, also in the woods on Midsummer, are a group of hardworking laborers who are in the woods to practice a play they want to put on for Lord Theseus and his new bride. And then the other characters that we have in the forest are, of course, the Fae. There's the king and the queen of the fairies, who are having a kind of fight, and then there are many mischievous fairy servants, essentially. Everyone ends up in the woods on Midsummer, and shenanigans ensue. So this was a really nice reread. I got this version so that this folder version, so I could have the footnotes and make reading this a lot more enjoyable for me, because, like, I know Shakespeare, but I don't know Shakespeare, so I just need that extra little help. The footnotes and the introduction were very useful, and I really enjoyed them. There were several lines that were in here that I had forgotten were a part of this novel, lines that I particularly love or recall sometimes, such as, for example, though she be but little, she is fierce. Love that line. Forgot that that was in here. So that was also an enjoyable thing, is seeing that. Honestly, I was not really a fan of Helena, the character taking Demetrius's verbal abuse and just saying she let him kill her if he really wanted to, because she loved him so much. I feel like that's not really great, and it's like, girl, get some help. This fuckboy is not worth that. You are worth way more than him. He sucks really terribly. Hermia's dad is terrible. You don't own your children. I'm sorry. You can't own anyone. You certainly don't own your children. So that's fun. Oberon is a conniving asshole. These are things that I'm seeing in here and realizing that I have more problems with a lot of the characters in here than I feel like I probably did when I first read this when I was younger. But this is me taking a modern viewpoint on this. This was like not probably issues back in the day when Shakespeare was like writing and having these put on at the Globe or whatever, so it's whatever. The humor in here is still pretty great. I laughed audibly, which is always a big deal with me. I don't always laugh audibly when I'm reading, and this made that happen, so that was fun. Lots of shenanigans in here, which I always enjoy in a play. I also watched the movie version after I finished reading this. I would highly recommend it. I know that there are a few movie versions. There's one that was done pretty recently with some big name actors in it. The version that I watched, which is also the version that I was introduced to this play with when I was younger, came out in 1996 and is actually the Royal Shakespeare Company putting this on. I would highly, highly, highly recommend that version. It had me cackling. It is absolutely hilarious. The facial expressions of the actors when they're doing things too, just on point. It gets a little bit avant-garde at some places, but I mean, that's appropriate considering this is a Midsummer and things are whacked out and it's supposed to be like a kind of dream-y, sequency type style of events, so that works perfectly for it. Also, yeah, like I said, it's really funny. There are some points in it that might be a little bit inappropriate, I guess, which is not something that I really thought about when I was a kid, but watching it now as an adult after so many years of not seeing it, I was like, wow, that shit definitely went over my head back then, but this is really raunchy and kind of really funny right now. So, you know, if you want to watch it and you have little kids, I don't know, maybe look at that first, I guess. Use your discretion, basically. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and honestly that helped as well with context because it goes by the script. It was basically this whole play. It wasn't like really I mean, it was an adaptation obviously, but it wasn't like they didn't change anything. It was the script. It definitely helped give context to certain things that are said within here, and it was very helpful in that sense because plays are meant to be seen performed. And while I did understand more thanks to the footnotes and whatnot that are in here, it is of course always better to see a visual representation to help further the point that, oh, that line's supposed to be funny. I get it now. Okay. Like that kind of thing. Yeah. But anyway, I would recommend that version. And I would recommend reading this if I feel like this is a play that is a fairly easier Shakespeare to get into because there is so much humor in here. Yeah, I had a really good time rereading this and I give this 4 stars. And the next book I read was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. It is following, first of all, Professor Aronnax, as well as his servant, that I can't remember his servant's name right now, and then also the harpoonist Ned Land. They are all on a big ship in the ocean on a mission to find this mysterious creature that has been attacking ships and scaring the crap out of people essentially for a couple of years, and they eventually encounter this creature, which is not a creature at all. It is in fact a submersible, high-tech for the time, and also I guess high-tech for now too, ship called the Nautilus, which is captained by the mysterious Captain Nemo and his almost silent crew. And so our main adventuring people are kind of taken hostage by this captain and basically travel around the undersea world with him aboard the Nautilus. I have some mixed feelings about this book. I have to be honest in the fact that I am most definitely not a sciencey person. The only part of science that ever really has interested me has been like meteorology, specifically storms. Like, I'm very fascinated by like hurricanes and tornadoes. So yeah, that's like the only part of science that's ever particularly fascinated me. I end up either being really bored to tears or confused by most other things, and especially when you add like math into the mix, if you're going into like more physical science, chemistry, engineering, stuff like that, it gets even worse because I'm incredibly bad at math and my brain just shuts off when numbers are involved. Like, I almost failed biology, guys, and I did fail chemistry. So you can imagine that, like, a large chunk of this book was indecipherable or incredibly tedious for me. I do have to give Jules Verne credit, though. I honestly don't know that much about him as a person, like what kind of person he was and what he was into exactly, but the man wrote books like he had a degree in whatever the subject was. Like, he was like that in Journey to the Center of the Earth too. It was all geology stuff, which part of it was fascinating and then the rest of it was incredibly boring. That's kind of how things went in here as well. There is a large section of this where Nemo is talking to Professor Aronnax, and he is trying to explain basically how the ship works and the various things that they do, which I suppose for anyone who is interested in how machines work and how things are put together, that's probably super fascinating to me. I ended up just skimming the rest of it because I had no idea what they were talking about. I couldn't understand it and I was really bored. But I mean, I have to give him credit because he either did so much research and learned a whole bunch of things and knew a whole bunch of things to be able to explain it within here about how the ship works and how things are done in like the ocean, or how they thought they were back in like the 18 whenever this was written, or he knew enough and then made a whole bunch of shit up and it sounds plausible. Either way, a lot of work done, very well done on his part, but for me that kind of lowered my enjoyment of the book overall, just because I, again, am not a very sciencey person, and again, I either end up being really confused and then feel like a giant idiot and that makes me grumpy, or I am really bored. There's also a lot of classification that is of different animal life and plant life undersea in here, which again kind of really boring to me. I had no idea what most of these things were. I ended up having to look up a lot of stuff. I stopped a lot to look up various things on my phone because I was trying to picture what he was talking about, and in some cases I found animals that were very fascinating, and it was fun to be able to look that up. But on the other case, it was just very slow going through here because I had to keep stopping and looking things up and trying to understand better what he was explaining about. There are no graphics in here of the Nautilus, which I feel is something that would have been a lot more helpful. I almost wish that there was an illustrated version of this, or I could find an illustrated version of this so I could better picture things in my head. As it was, I had to look up basically graphic maps of the Nautilus that fans have drawn over the years, so I could try to get an idea of what this ship in particular looked like. For things I did like, I did really enjoy the bits where they are exploring the ocean floor. There was one particular setting that they went to in here that made me super excited. I loved that a lot. I really liked the action scenes for some fight sequences. That was pretty fun. And anytime Captain Nemo was a complete sociopath, I actually really enjoyed that too. He was a very complicated character, and I really enjoyed that. He's not a good man, but he's not a fully bad man either. He's flawed. He's in the gray area, and I really liked that aspect of him. He was actually my favorite character out of the bunch. Ned Land felt like a stereotype. Professor Aronnax was incredibly annoying, which is unfortunate because he's the one that's narrating the story. And his servant, or his assistant, Aronnax's assistant, he's basically just a human classification device. He doesn't really have a personality, and that kind of sucked. Like I said, I can't remember what his name is. It was like Conserver, Corsair, no, that's a French pirate. You know, whatever. He was like, whatever. He was obviously not that important. He didn't make that much of an impression on me. This was clearly a well done novel, like I said, but just a lot of the contents wasn't really my cup of tea, so my enjoyment level is lower. I was bored for a good chunk of this, and I was somewhat disappointed by part of the ending of this. Like, looking at you, Aronnax, I'm not happy with you. To be honest, even though this is really well done, I cannot manage to give it a high score. Like, I just feel like I can't give it one because even though it is so well written, my enjoyment level of it was lower. So yeah, I can't really give this more than 3 stars, to be honest. The next book I read was Daughter of the Deep by Rick Riordan. This is a sequel, in a sense, to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So this follows Anna Dakar, and she is a freshman at the prestigious Harding Pencroft Academy. There are 4 houses at Harding Pencroft Academy, and they all focus on very specific things, and they are responsible for churning out some of the world's best and brightest naval heroes, underwater scientists, researchers, etc. Anna and her brother Dev both go to the school, and they have for the past couple of years since their parents died in a science accident. It was a sea mission that they went on. Anna and her classmates, it's basically the end of the year of their freshman year, and her classmates are heading off to do the finals. There was like a final mission or trials basically that the whole class has to go through, and it like will determine whether or not basically they make it to their sophomore year. But on their way to these trials, her and her classmates endure a tragedy that basically changes things. And now Anna and her classmates are off on this crazy adventure that is going to test their skills as students, as a class, and along the way, as they are now pitted against one of their rival schools, the Land Institute. And also along the way, Anna learns some things about her own family and heritage that also change things. So I really enjoyed this. This has a bit of a slow beginning, despite the fact that action happens within the first couple of chapters. It still really felt like it dragged along for the first half of the book. Don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed it. This has the typical Riordan humor. I liked most of the characters, and I was definitely invested in finding out what was going to happen within the story, but it did feel like things didn't get crazy interesting until later. Once the action started, it got really good. There are a couple of characters introduced later on in the book that I absolutely loved, and the Nautilus ship, I would willingly watch a show just about that ship. That was my favorite part of the book. Any scenes that involved the Nautilus were my favorite parts of the book. I would read way more about this ship. I fucking love this ship. I just absolutely adored it. It was honestly a very unique take on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. What they ended up referencing a lot was the Disney version of live action. I believe it was made in the 1950s, and it stars Kirk Douglas, I think. So that's what was referenced most of the time in here, I believe, because I believe that rather than just the Jules Verne classic was what was used, I think, for a lot of Riordan's inspiration for this. I think I'll end up having to give that movie a watch. And also, what was mentioned in here a lot was also the Mysterious Island, which I didn't realize was also kind of a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea sequel, because Captain Nemo is also within that book, and there are some other characters that are kind of introduced within there that are also play heavy in here, so I feel like maybe I should also try to check out the Mysterious Island and read that too, so I can get a little more context for things that happen in here, and a little more understanding of Nemo, because I guess more about him is mentioned within there, and he was my favorite character from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, so that would be interesting too. There were just some really great badass moments in here too that I really enjoyed. I'm fine with this being a standalone, but I also almost wish that we could have a little bit more. I don't know if Riordan is planning on writing any more, or if this is just a standalone, but I kind of really hope that he does decide to expand this world just a little bit more. Maybe have another book that follows Anna later, have another book that follows any of the other characters later. I'd really be interested in that. I almost kind of hope that they turn this into a movie, but at the same time, Disney owns it. Are they going to screw it up? I don't know. But yeah, there were a couple of points in here, a couple of parts that came up that I was a little bit, I didn't necessarily not like it, I was just questioning why, what the purpose of this being in the book was, but for the most part I did really enjoy it, other than it being a little bit slow in the beginning, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. The next book I read was 8 Minutes to the Sun by Colette Inez. This is a collection of poetry. I think I mentioned this in a recent book haul I did of some of my old books that I just collected from my folks' house. But I think I got this at some point when I was in college. I might have picked it up from, I don't know, to be honest. A secondhand shop perhaps or something. Obviously I enjoyed this because there were a couple of pages, the corners bent down, which is what I usually do when there's something and I want to remember like a line or a poem from it or something. So obviously I did enjoy this back in the day. As far as a reread goes, I didn't remember any of this, and to be honest, I'm kind of confused about the majority of these poems. I feel like I'm probably not the target audience for this. I like my poetry to be a little less, I don't know if intellectual is the less kind of the correct word for this. Maybe not I guess intellectual is kind of what I mean. I like my poetry to have, if there's metaphors, they're like obvious metaphors, and it's not something that's going to take me reading the same thing 10 times or having to like break it down by line, like really thinking about it, or have to get a professor to help me decipher it. Like, I don't like poems like that. Those are not, to me, enjoyable poems. I like to curl up with a book and just let the words wash over me and just read them and mark what my favorite lines are and write them down somewhere and just have the feelings of it, kind of like, you know, I like that. I don't like feeling like I need to annotate a fucking book of poetry. Like, I don't enjoy that experience as much. So that's why I'm saying that maybe I wasn't exactly the target audience for this particular book. There were a few lines here and there that did feel like they kind of hit home a little bit, but I feel like for the most part the ultimate meaning of this collection was a bit out of reach for me personally. But that's honestly more of a me thing than it is having to do with this collection of poems. I did give this 3 stars. So the next book I read was actually an audiobook, and it was The Man in the Brown Suit by Agatha Christie. This is actually one of her standalones, sort of. Kind of a standalone. It doesn't really have Poirot or Marple or Tommy and Tuppence or anybody in it. It does have Colonel Race, who is a character in a few other books of hers. He's in a couple of Poirot's, I believe, but he's kind of a minor character in this too. So yeah, this is basically following young orphaned Anne Bedingfeld. She witnesses a horrible thing one day. She's recently orphaned and is trying to figure out her future. She is very clever and feisty and proud, and she wants to find a good situation for herself, but she doesn't want to settle. What she wants is adventure, and one day she catches it when she is walking in the tube. She's waiting for the train to arrive, and she sees a man in a man ahead of her waiting, and he turns as she approaches and sees something behind her that scares the shit out of him so much that he falls backward onto the live rails of the train and is electrocuted. That happening, and also this doctor figure who comes to look at him and does not act like a proper doctor, piques her interest, and Anne is doing crazy interesting things to try to figure out the mystery behind this random guy's death. She smells adventure and she is on her way to find it. So I listened to this audiobook while I was working, which was rather enjoyable. The audiobook itself was done by, I believe, Alice Larkin is who read it, and I think she did a really good job. I really enjoyed her take on things. This was action-packed from the get-go. It was very entertaining. Anne Bedingfeld herself is feisty, super clever. I do think she catches feelings maybe a bit too quickly in here. This was published in 1924, and people just kind of did things really quickly back then, oftentimes. that also gives the publishing date also gives some kind of context to references about women's versus men's behaviors, views toward each other, views on Africa, colonialism, crime. This was after the Great War, so no one thought that another world war was possible at the time. They were like living the high life and enjoying things. England was still ruling over countries that had no business being. Though I guess in this case, part of the book takes place in South Africa, and I don't know, the Dutch ruled that, right? That was more Dutch than England. I don't know. Either way, it sucks. Colonialism sucks. Those bits in here were not great. Honestly, I wanted to have more problems with this book. Overall, there is some colonialism in here. There's a bit of bigotry in here, mostly in the latter part of the novel, when the setting moves to South Africa. There's also, it's not really domestic violence, but it's like hints at the possibility of domestic violence, and it was viewed as like okay and kind of exciting, like to have a potential partner, like say they could just choke the life out of you and then put their hand on your throat, and that's like thrilling and exciting as opposed to really fucking horrifying. That I wasn't 100% okay with. I feel like that messaging maybe not so great. So like the hints at that, and also the bits of colonialism and bigotry, those weren't so great. It wasn't okay then. It's certainly not okay now. But in the context of the day, which is 1924, that was considered par for the course. It probably wasn't that big of a deal back then. It doesn't excuse it, but I'm giving you context for the time period that it was in. It's important to understand the context of the time. Still not acceptable, but yeah. Thing though is that I can't help but enjoy the rest of the book though. Anne is clever and funny and determined, independent. She has a temper that I can definitely relate to. She's plucky as hell, and I just really enjoyed her for the most part. I loved the action, I loved her detective work. Most of the other characters are pretty interesting. There's a couple I didn't really like. Even the romancy bits, minus the hints at DV, the rest of it is pretty okay. Anne's narration is interspersed with diary entries from another character that I couldn't help but to love either. He is absolutely hilarious, and I loved his diary entries. I think most of my enjoyment probably came from the audiobook. Like I said, it was very well done. I also had no clue as to the identity of the main villain in here. No clue at all. So that was another brilliant one. Like I didn't know who it was, and the thing is that I didn't care because I was enjoying the story so much that I wasn't like, my brain wasn't working at, ooh, whose it is, and trying to ferret it out. I was just like along for the ride here. I did end up giving this 4 stars. I just could not give it higher than that due to the issues within here that I mentioned, but I did for the most part really enjoy it. The last book that I ended up reading in June was Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. So this is the first Robert Langdon book. Robert Langdon is a religious symbologist who works at Harvard, and one day he receives a phone call late in the night from CERN, which is a scientific center. I have no idea what it stands for, but they have the great big hadron collider thingy underground, and they're in like Switzerland, and he gets a call from them because they have had a murder. Why is Robert Langdon, who is a religious symbologist professor, being asked to look into a murder? He's not a detective or anything. Well, the murder was ritualistic, and there is some religious symbology involved, and he is called in to take a look at that and help figure out what is up with it exactly. Along the way, he figures out that what is actually involved is the Illuminati, And there's also a problem. This scientist had some technology that in itself is really cool, but if misused, could basically annihilate an entire city. For example, Vatican City, the natural enemies of the Illuminati. So this sees Robert Langdon suddenly off to the Vatican along with the daughter of the slain scientist to try to find this device and figure out what is going on. Is the Illuminati back? What is happening exactly? And can they save the Vatican and everyone who lives within the city? I have heard it said that you shouldn't really revisit old favorites years later, maybe, because they might end up disappointing you. Oh, Dan Brown. Let's list his crimes within this book, shall we? First, we have typical male written descriptions of a main female character who is dressed not scantily clad. Not scantily clad, but she is showing enough skin that it is constantly brought up, like all the time. We also have a Mary Sue of a main character. Robert Langdon was someone who originally back in the day I thought was pretty cool. Now all I want to do is punch him in his smug face. He is just kind of insufferable. He is a tweed-jacketed know-it-all. Also, I don't know this for certain, but occasionally he feels like he might be a self-insert character for Dan Brown, and that also is a little bothersome. Then we have the villain, who's essentially a terrorist who is using a bomb to create terror, and they made him have Middle Eastern origin. Because of course they did. Of course they gave him Middle Eastern origin. Because Dan Brown isn't a bigoted, unimaginative hack. Why, Dan Brown? Why? Why? Number 4. I'm also a bit salty at this point about the whole Illuminati thing now, looking at this in 2022. Back when I first read this, when I was in, I don't know, high school, I think it was some point in high school I read this. I thought it was cool and fun back in the day. I can remember vaguely looking up the Illuminati to see, oh, was this actually a real thing? And just being kind of interested in that. Not like in thinking that there's like a great big plot of them or any crazy thing like that, but just more in the fact that this was a group that used to exist, and I'm kind of interested in secret societies that used to exist or might still exist. Like, I find them kind of interesting in a creepy way, and I'm also really nosy, so I like learning about stuff like that. So back in the day, I thought that was really interesting, and I read the Da Vinci Code first, and then I discovered that he also had this book. This is the first. This came before that, so I read this second, and I mixed with, like, I forget what the secret group, the Priory of something or other, that is a secret society within the Da Vinci Code. So I was riding off the high of that secret society and, you know, riddles and, you know, mysterious crypto cryptodex, something, cryptex, you know, like the stuff that they use to, that kind of thing. Like, I was interested in that kind of stuff. So I found that really interesting back in the day. Looking at it in 2022, in a world where, not even in a world where, in a country where a great chunk of our population is taken over by totally whacked out conspiracy theorists who are just railing about the Illuminati existing and there being crazier things happening and all kinds of, like, stuff, I feel like in a sense that maybe this book added to the potentially crazy madness that we are currently living in. Now, I don't have proof of that. This is a conspiracy theory of my own, I guess, but I don't know. Just reading about those sections of it just gave me really yucky feelings, and I know that maybe that just has more to do with the world that we're currently living in than it has to do with, you know, this being any fault of Dan Brown's. But I'm just saying it, I don't know, those sections made me feel a little salty just because the world feels like it's gone fucking mad. 5. The writing was not as good as I remembered. I've read a lot of different books since then, and a lot of different, like, mystery thrillers since this kind of counts, I guess. So I feel like maybe my standards have changed for content since then. But, I mean, if you want to read action-packed trash, you can't get any better action-packed trash than this particular thing, or, like, any Dan Brown books in general. It is a little, I do have to say that his books do get a little formulaic, which is why I stopped reading them. I have this book, I have Da Vinci Code somewhere, it's probably still at my parents' house, and it's pretty thick. It is a thick boy for that, but if you're okay with a thick boy of action-packed trash, go for it. Yeah. So, I mean, it was an okay reread, but in a sense, it was also slightly disappointing because I remember enjoying this a lot more, and now I just didn't. I did give this 3 stars because you know that Dan Brown did do some research and did do some working, but he's also a sensationalist in a sense because he always has like these fact sections and author's note to letting you know that different things are factual and making you think more, and because he's, I don't know, I find that annoying too, but whatever. Those were the books that I ended up reading, and then I also had 2 books that I actually DNF'd this month. The first of which was To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Everybody and their uncle has basically been exclaiming how good Virginia Woolf is, but I've also heard people say that you really have to have a certain mindset or whatever to read her books. So the one that I have heard recommended as a okay-ish starter for her was To the Lighthouse, and maybe is not as surreal and crazy as some of her others. So I did start reading an ebook of that, and I made it not that far in, really, to be honest. A few pages, I think, and quickly decided that that was not for me. I didn't really like the run-on sentences, and to be honest, I'm not really I kind of realized that the way it was written, I feel like such an idiot, because I know that there's a specific phrase that's used to describe that kind of writing, but I can't really remember what it is right now, because it's been so long since college. But there's a certain style that she writes in, and it is a style that I am not a particular fan of. We had to read a couple of books kind of along those style lines in school, and I loathed them to my very core. I had forgotten that that was something that I didn't particularly enjoy, but again, I'm older now, and there are a couple of books that I wouldn't have liked back in the day that I really enjoy now, so I figured might as well give this a chance, and I tried, but I just could not. I didn't enjoy it at all, and I just decided that, you know what, life's too short to keep reading a book just because people recommend it, so I give up, and that's that. I don't know if I will look at any other Virginia Woolfs, because again, I've heard that To the Lighthouse is a little more accessible than, oh, what is her other one? The Waves or something like that. So, yeah, I just have a feeling that maybe she's not for me, and you know what? That's okay, because not every author is for everyone, so that's whatever. The other book that I ended up DNFing was also a book of poetry, and it is The Human Abstract, and it is by Elizabeth Willis. apparently at the time in college, I thought that a couple of lines here and there were interesting because I did fold corners down like I do, like I said, normally. But I didn't enjoy this time. Again, I don't know if it's because I'm outside of school for so long and maybe I'm dumber now or something. I have no clue. But I do have to say that if the other poetry book was, that I mentioned earlier, was like hard to understand, this might have well have been written in another language. I DNF'd it about a third of the way through because I had no idea what the fuck the poet was talking about. Could not understand or access this whatsoever. I skimmed through the rest of it hoping that maybe I would figure out some kind of sense of, oh, that's really interesting. No, I didn't get any better. So yeah, DNF'd, and this is going into my giveaway bag. So these were the books, minus the ebooks and the audiobook that I read, but these are everything that I read in June. Had a middling month for reading, I suppose. I'm feeling a little bit salty, I guess, this month because I had a couple of books I really enjoyed and then the others were not enjoyable or were disappointing in some way. I find some enjoyment a little bit out of them, but for the most part they were disappointing, so I don't know. I feel like this year I feel like I'm not having as enjoyable a reading year as the past couple, really. Like, I have a couple of books that just make me so ecstatic about reading and in love with words, and then I have a bunch that end up being really disappointing to me, or I feel really fucking salty about them, and I don't, but we're halfway through the year. I'm hoping that the second half of the year has way more enjoyable reads than the first half had, I guess. But yeah, so this is what I read. Please let me know down below if you have read any of these, if these are particular favorites of yours, or if you didn't like any of them, and if you have any books that are like similar to these, well, similar to maybe this one and this one, maybe not so many, some of the others. Let me know, please recommend any, if you can. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you haven't, please consider subscribing. I will have, you know, more thoughts on books in the future and random things. I am trying to keep to a schedule of getting stuff out to you on Thursday-ish, Thursday or Friday. Hopefully we can stick to that schedule. No promises exactly. But yeah, hope you guys are having a wonderful reading month, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!